Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana White. Thank you very much for the honor to speak to the Mastery Circle this morning. I'd like to begin with a reading from the Tao Te Ching. The supreme goodness is to be like water, for it benefits all things without contention. Live in accordance with the nature of things. In dwelling, build your house on solid ground. In being, keep your mind still, seek the depths. When giving, be generous and kind. When speaking, be truthful and honest. In confrontation, be gentle and compassionate. In governance, be just, do not control. In action, remember, timing is everything. Water is content with its own nature. One who lives in accordance with nature does not go against the way of things. One moves in harmony with the present moment, knowing the truth of just what to do. So, I think what we want to learn is, what do we mean by autonomy? And autonomy, it has its own laws. We have a sense of self-governance. It authorizes freedom of the will, freedom from external control or influences, and personal liberty. So this is a problem if we're talking about coexisting with one another, or if we're talking about having a relationship with nature. Because coexistence doesn't really call for boundaries, doesn't call for ownership or management. What it looks for is a way in which we can exist without ownership and participate. So what I want you to do is I want you to write down these 7 symbols. You can put them anywhere on your paper. Ultimately, I'm going to ask you to look at the 7 symbols here. You can think of them as having names, but actually names become the first path to separating yourself from the symbols. Each of these symbols has a feeling that is imbued within the psyche. For the psyche sees in symbols. The psyche does not see in words. We teach ourselves words as a way of understanding that which is beyond words. The things that are beyond the words are what we're trying to capture with the words. So if we really want to understand ourselves, what we need is a vocabulary. We need a way to penetrate that which we have made ourselves to be. And everything that we think that we are can be penetrated by using symbols. And we know that symbols exist in art and in music and in the natural world, but let's try to get to the thing itself. So if you'll write these 7 symbols down, ultimately what I would like you to do is think of the one that means or resonates with you most deeply. You have a circle, we have a spiral, we have a cross, we have a square, and we have upward and downward triangles, and we have an equal sign. Together, these symbols convey the archetypes that we're inhabited with. And if you think about what archetypes are, they're governing principles. And what they do is that these archetypes, they are the engine of the divine world, of the world that we have found ourselves inhabiting. When we were without consciousness and we are completely imbued in nature, before we had words, before we had stories, before we had all of that, we had an archetypal presence that in relation to the natural world was called the participation mystique. And there was no separation. There are no boundaries. There was only a condition of oneness. If you think about animals that live in the wild, if you think about your own pets, if you think about the birds that you see around, they have no trouble fulfilling their archetypal nature. Their archetypal nature is who they are. It's only human beings that have learned to separate themselves from the world that we live in. And Joseph Campbell talks about it, and he says that the myths are ways that we recapture our orientation to the cosmos, to the culture, to who we are. And so we make up stories to talk about what it is that is who we are and how we're going to go about doing it. But often what happens is that we start finding the stories and we never get past the stories to the archetypes that are driving the stories into existence. The stories are there to convey beyond. Ancient cultures had storytellers and shamans that could deal with the unconscious. And the unconscious is where the divine lives. The divine manifests itself in the physical world, but we need devices in order to penetrate and get past the appearances of the world. Modern culture has made big business out of telling you that here are the images that you ought to see yourself in. So we've become largely narcissistic by looking at magazines and movies and what have you, and we see, oh, that's who I would like to become. And we stop at the surface and we imagine or manufacture ourselves into being a certain way, and that's where we go. These 7 symbols will allow you to orient yourself in a way. And what we have going across here, this is a device that I constructed that allows you to look on one hand over here with the equal sign and over here on the square to look across the continuum of a relation. On the left-hand side, you have everything being equal. No differences, no boundaries, no nothing. It's all equivalent. There's no difference between the flower and the elephant. There's no difference between the blade of grass and whatever. Everything has an equivalence. As we move through understanding to the right-hand side, what we have is a construction of a square. And a square is one of the sacred geometric concepts that human beings have come up with. It's rational, it's logical, it's also cold, it's very patriarchal. That's our relationship axis. Up and down, we have the identity axis. So we have the 2 triangles that represent the solar nature of our human consciousness. And you can see this in religion, where we point to the sky and we build tall steeples and we do all of the things that get us off of the ground. And then we have the lower. We go into the depths and we plumb the depths and we go into the darkness of the soul. You could think of these as being spirit at the top and soul at the bottom. At the very beginning, what you have, if you'll notice in the very, very center, there's a still point. Everything turns around the still point. T.S. Eliot will tell us that around the still, the dance begins. Mm-hmm. And it's where we move. We move in a spiral. Life evolves. We're continuing to build on one thing and another. We get caught in the illusions of time. We expand ourselves into space. We become larger and smaller according to our needs. And the entire construct here, the colored portion, is what I've designed as being us, This is that we are the circle. We are all of these. You put them on something like this. Now, the interesting thing to me, as you look at the stack of symbols, is that some of us will gravitate there. We need to emphasize there is no right way for these to be. Some people are structural by nature. There's people who are extroverts and they like to work in groups. There's people who like to work by themselves. There's people, I mean, you go down the list and there's all of these characteristics that are manifest in the world of work. These show up in their archetypal nature by people saying, okay, I like to work with people. That's probably, I ought to pick that cross and put it up there because that's crossroads, that's relational, that's balances identity and relation. On the other hand, somebody might say, you know, the circle is such a sign of feminine involvement. It's whole. We don't get to throw any of them out. They're all in us. And they each have a voice, and they'll have a different voice at different times in our life. When we're young and we're filled with fire, boy, I tell you, that upward triangle is looking really good, filled with ambition, and we just think that, you know, we can do anything. And as we develop a little humility, that upward triangle starts to move down a bit. I've always been a creature of change. It's surprising to me that I have some stability because I've constantly confronted disaster by changing my life according to what opportunities seem to come at me. And the water really speaks to me because flow is really big, having a court sense, having a sense of, I wrote an essay called Find the Open Man. And it has to do with just knowing where the next opportunity, the next parking space is going to be when you get there. Because if you don't have a parking space, if you can't find the open man, there's a lot of closed doors in life. And there are people who find that, we know, when you're out there, if you're in sales or if you're doing something where you have to get work by being at the right place at the right time, timing is really important. I've always been amazed at people who can act, who can do that kind of work. They really have a challenge in their lives of being in the audition room when the job's available. It doesn't do any good to audition for a part that got cast and made 2 years ago. Again, each of these is a mirror to your own psyche. And again, there's no right way for these to be. But the way in which they open up to you and awaken that sense of who you are. William Blake wrote that you can see the entire cosmos. You can see everything in a grain of sand. And that's the still point. All of these, they're all there. Everything is surrounding your own existence. And to be able to understand these, if you meditate on the circle, you begin to see circles. You begin to see the conjunctions of the cross. And there's a reason why religions have done what they've done. The way in which, if you take the upward, downward triangle, this is the Star of David. You take those two and you put them on top of one another, and you have the ascent to the spirit and you have the descent to the soul. Now, I don't know if that's how or why they came up with that star, but there's a reason why symbols serve these institutions. If you look at the upward triangle, you can see it used in advertising. You can see the logos of corporations trying to imbue the archetypal substance of these. To me, what we have is a way that we can penetrate and move through the illusions of a separate self. If we have a separate self and we're stuck with a separate self, how do we know which one of these or how we go about moving ourselves to a sense of wholeness? Well, we know because our future is derived from the ways in which we feed ourselves on the things that are nourishing us. And if we are nourished by ambition, if we're nourished by affiliation, those are the things that sustain us and that we have chosen to. If we find ourselves being attracted, if you will, by the nature of community, that's going to sustain us. And human beings are collective animals by nature. We gravitate to one another. And it's only the human ego that says, I can do this by myself. You know, I don't need people. I mean, I really want to withdraw. And it really depends upon who we are and who we want to make ourselves out to be. The only act in town that we have any kind of control over is authenticating who we happen to be. The path of discovery is not out there, but it's in here. It's the thing we look at when we shut our eyes and we say, okay, who's in there? We have to really deal with who we have become. If you happen to be a sibling, if you have siblings, you have a different psychological orientation if you're the oldest brother or the youngest sister or vice versa. Wherever you happen to have found yourself, these archetypes, in a way, are influenced by our geography, our parental unit, our community, what family we happen to have been born into, what time that we happen to have been born, the influences of the cosmos. Astrology would say that we actually are influenced at birth by a certain star pattern or celestial pattern. I know that on a month-by-month basis, I myself feel the moon. Now, it's not a whole lot of work for me to understand that there's a relationship to me to the outside world, that somehow or another, this gravitational pull of the cosmos is doing its work on me personally. I don't totally understand it, but I know it's real related to the moon. So all I wanted to do today was to leave you with these 7 symbols. And if you write them down, just keep them around you. I will say it's not totally my idea. I took the work of a woman, the late Angeles Arian, and she had 5. But she didn't have the dark ones. She didn't have the downward triangle, and she didn't have the equal sign. And to me, there is something that we've learned from physics, that we're atomically interconnected. We share something in and with one another. Recently, we had a project called Infinite Potential, the life and ideas of David Bohm. And he talks about the implicate order. We are deeply interconnected in one another. And this coronavirus has told us that. It has indicated that things that happen in one part of the world affect parts in the other part of the world. And we are seeing the script of interdependency, interbeing, interconnections writ large through this. And it's not like we can will it away. There's nothing that we can do. We can protect ourselves individually by wearing masks, by social distancing. And you notice how uncomfortable it is. We want to be together. We want to collaborate. And this Zoom project, the Myth Salon that I took, used to meet in my house. Any number of you have been in my home to experience the Myth Salons, but we couldn't do it. I mean, we couldn't congregate. So we went online, and it's been a fabulous success. We have people all over the world coming in. It tells me that this drive to interconnect, to express and participate in interconnection unites the circle. That equal sign on one end and the square, the rational patriarchal square on the other end, they come full circle. And we find ourselves returning, again, to use T.S. Eliot, to a place that we started. That condition of oneness that's inescapable. That sense of oneness, you can stand and you know, if you've had a feeling of deja vu, and you go and you've been there. I don't know when I was here, but I've had this exact feeling. I've had this sense coming over me, and I don't really know. Well, that's the equal sign in the square, wrapping itself around the circle and using the spiral, the motion, the evolutionary nature of the human psyche as a way of traveling that distance. One final note on this, I had come up with a really elaborate way of communicating these 7 symbols and how they moved and what that, but I made it over 20 years ago. And the arrangement was different. I think that was interesting to me. When I did this process on myself, the upward triangle was above the square. And I've always had the notion of change, feminine wholeness, and conjunction, affiliations, as being the 3 that really seem to float my boat. And I discounted the rest. I've done a lot of work with like the shadow sides of science or the shadow sides of the rational world. And we can get trapped in these boxes. So I really wanted to push that one down. I'm very big on trust. I'm very big on the idea of opening myself up to a new opportunity and stepping off and trusting that the world will rise up to greet me. And I've lived by that. I mean, I know it works. If you have faith in that's going to happen, it'll work for you. It'll do it. But you can't jump off the cliff and say, well, I wonder if I did the right thing. You got to know that it's going to work, and it does.
I have a question, Mr. White.
Yes.
And that is, you said we should draw these symbols and have them with us, carry with them, maybe in our purse. How do they help us in real life?
Minnie, let's if you take these symbols, it's a roadmap. You're inside your mind. What you have is, let's say you're going to go shop for groceries. If you tend to be a list maker, let's say you leave your list at home by accident and you get to the store and you go, oh my God, I can't remember what was on my list. That's an indication of how your mind works. And once we know how our own minds work, we can do something about it. Human beings like being in control. It's why some people make lists and other people don't. Not everybody makes a list when they go to the supermarket. And some people go to the supermarket and they wander down the aisles. They just do it. That's how they shop. That's worth knowing about yourself. Do you need to know where you're going before you go there? Because if you know where you're going, that's the path you need to take. The Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland looks down at Alice and says, where are you going? She says, well, I don't know. He says, well, that's great, because if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. That's useful to know. If you need directions, that's useful to know. So this is a roadmap. And they don't mean anything if you don't put them in an order. It's like looking at a map and tearing up the pieces and putting them back together in a random order. If you don't have them in an order, they don't do anything. But putting them in an order does something. You can take those 7 symbols and put them like this, and that'll tell you something. I can tell you by looking at this, that person's not a list maker. Right. Otherwise, the square would be further to the top. Or the triangle, the upward triangle would be at the top. Because the upward triangle and the square are about structure and order, achievement, goals, those sorts of things that get us somewhere. If you don't care where you're going, then you can take any of these things. So the more you are comfortable with the uncertainty or the ambiguous nature of existence, and life comes at us with an ambiguous path. It is water. It's not rocks coming at us. It's coming at us with a certain amount of flow. And my feeling is that you can build a dam around yourself and protect yourself from the water, or you can figure out how to let the water in.
Thank you.
Jasmine has a question.
Okay.
So the connection between astrology and the symbols, can you explain that one more time? And yeah, the connection between astrology and how the symbols relate.
I'm going to only be able to go down this path a little ways, because it's like, to me, it's like opening up a chemistry book. I can look at it and wow, is there a lot of intelligence in there? I don't understand it, but I feel it. I know twice a month I go through these bodily sensations, and they're before a full moon and before a new moon. And I started having these, becoming aware of them when probably junior high school, middle school, somewhere along in there. I didn't know what they were. I just knew that I got these periodic episodes where I just felt agitated or uneasy or having these bodily sensations. And I was probably somewhere in my 20s or 30s when I began to associate it with the moon. And I realized these things are happening because the moon is having its effect upon me. And it's real. I mean, you can look at the tides, and we know that the most dramatic tides, and we're made out of water. So I began to look at that, and I began to pursue an awareness of that. It hasn't stopped it, hasn't made it any less demanding upon me, but it has given me more comfort and more ability to respond and coexist with others, because part of our relationship is physical. I mean, if you're all agitated and you're kind of coming on to everybody, that's not pleasant for other people. And So I began to kind of realize, okay, you know, these are good days for me to do studio work. And so if I'm feeling all like edgy and everything like that, that's not a good day for me to be out in public and doing producing and talking to people and being in meetings. If I can control that, if I have control over that kind of thing, that's a good day to do housework. Housework is great prior to the moon.
Dana, I love this. I'd love to get a copy of this. I'm just really excited to see it. I can see myself at different times of my life with different symbols up at the top.
Yeah.
And it is, you know, Gary Bobroff does the Tony Wolf's archetype. And I had that same kind of excitement, like there's a part in me or an itch in me I couldn't reach, and oh my gosh, there it is. It's very exciting to me. And how I'm for sure the spiral at the top. Sam just said, yeah, but I'm a list maker, so I'm also the square. I mean, I'm looking at where I am now in my life, and I'm really very much struggling with the square.
Oh,
and
the square.
wanting to bring that up more in my life and my way of living and being. It's getting in my way that it's not higher up on my list. I just love this. Thank you for bringing it to us.
And you can't force the position. You can't take one symbol and say, well, I want to be like that, or this is the arrangement that I like. I mean, you know, you have to authenticate what it is that comes from who you are. That's why I say, don't look at the words on the right, look at the symbols. Just let the symbols do their talking, because that's the psyche talking to you. Your own psyche has a way of participating with you. And we think of ourselves as having a separate psyche. Our psyche is a continuity of relation with the entire cosmos. We are of one mind. There is, if we think in purely physical or metaphysical terms, there is only oneness. And it's our sense of, or the illusion of a separate self that keeps us from perceiving that oneness. That oneness is that place where we get where it's silent and still. And I worked this book. I had the great privilege of working and meeting a man named Joseph Bogorad, and his doctoral dissertation was cultivating the still point. Everybody's life should have a gift like that come into me. And then after his dissertation, he came to me and says, I want to make a book. So we produced this book together. It's called Cultivating the Still Point. Being relational by nature myself, I would like to get to the place where I can inhabit the still point. I know what it is and I know where it is. I'm an extrovert. I can't help that. If I look at Jung's types, I'm an ENFP. And it's one of the most minor of the 16 psychological types. The problem with it is that we live in a sensate, thinking, judging culture. When you look at what drives our culture is driven by image. They know, the advertisers know that you respond to images. So they put images in front of you that you will buy, products that you will use. They put things in your world that will become detractors to your true nature. The thing about it is that your separate self is the barrier that every culture and every religious tradition has tried to overcome. The Buddhists talk about it, about the path of suffering and getting on the Noble Eightfold Path. You got to get past your attachments, and you know, you've got to get to non-dualism and all of this kind of stuff. These are all the languages that we surround ourselves with the separate self. The separate self is, it's the challenge. It's the thing that we have to overcome. When we participate deeply in the zone, when we play sports, when we dance, we fall in love, we go in someplace, and we get into that deep sense of Kairos time, we lose ourselves. We can participate endlessly. Kids can do it on the floor. They can wrap up blankets on the floor and play with little communities on the floor. They've lost their self. You can lose yourself. And in that, you find yourself. So it's the paradox of going down the Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole, that not only do you lose yourself, but you find yourself in the process. The one thing on my original construction of this, I didn't have the still point in there. I had a different relational line, and I didn't have the still point. And what I've realized is that the universal condition of the divine speaks through the particular. There's just an infinite variety of everything. It's only human beings that set up comparisons and they connect these things. Since we first discovered ourselves, self and other co-create. They come up at the same moment. These separations that we feel when we feel ourselves individualized, we need control. It's our guidance system. So that sense of personal autonomy has enriched the human condition since day one. I mean, it's coming out of the gate. That was our first sense of gaining self-control. And in a way, it's when you use the word mastery, what we're trying to do is exercise a degree of control over our experience and existence.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. My big question is how to exercise this with the world outside myself. So if I am succeeding in letting go of myself and finding that center, and in finding that center being connected to everything and everyone, how do I look for a job? So actually, how do I get a job? Because when I go for a job where I am ready to do anything that serves others, I am falling short of the expectations of the specific skills needed to do a job, even though I can do that job. So it seems to me that one needs to retain some sense of individual self and ego to be able to actually connect to the rest of the world, to be able to express that autonomy.
Yep. Okay, so let me follow up with you. The two things that I would use on here are the upward triangle and the cross. Upward triangle is a way of taking the broad base and focusing it on the nature and specifics of the job. So you want a job. You want to find out who they are, what they're doing, what you can do for them. You get specific. You start nailing down, getting rid of the things that are detractors. You focus on the essential. You develop a plan. Now, you need a plan to get a job. You need to know what the script is, what's the story, what's the narrative, and you start building that. That's the upward triangle. You know, you start taking many and you make it one. You don't look for all the jobs, you look for the particular job you're talking about, and you narrow in on that. You become a hunter. You don't hunt in the area where you're not hunting, you hunt where the food is. and you go over there and you look at who the person is, who you got to talk with, and you target your presentation. That's the cross. You become relational. You start dealing with that and you apply a strategy. By combining these various things, you find out that they bring up and they ask for different skills. Nobody cares about your intuitive nature when you're looking for a job. You know, nobody's going to look at, you know, how soulful you are and how wonderful you are and all that kind of stuff. They want to know what you can do for them. They want a warrior. If you're going to go out there and be something, you have to look at this warrior identity. This what can you do for them? How can you materialize their existence? We live in a do culture. Nobody cares about your being. You care about your being. I care about my being. I care in some way because I'm empathic. I'm empathetic. I have compassion for your being. But if I'm hiring you, I want to know what you can do for me. I want somebody out there who can handle a spear. Even if you're my front office person, I want somebody who is not going to scare people away. I want you to be friendly. I want you to be approachable. Those are all the yang kinds of things. You study that kind of stuff. You go in there, you get prepared, you have your list. Again, I'll just say one thing. I have trusted my own nature since I was a child. I am incarnate spiral. I mean, I have it wired. I am a creature of change, and I trust it. I trust the water. I wouldn't know how to do it any other way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. It was a great talk. Thank you so much.
Let me just communicate my thanks.